Dustin wouldn't know. All right, we want to say hello to the Salem News reporters, Paul Leighton and Dustin Luca. Gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, because this goes on at any time. But lots of stories, lots going on, of course, in the area. There's a continuation of stories, and there's always new stories. And at MSO News Sports, we really appreciate the fact that you guys can come on and flesh this stuff out for us and give us a little background. It was really exciting to be talking with you. It's been 2 weeks. Thanksgiving has come and gone. We survived it. And Paul, interesting story as we record this on Thursday, coming out of the North Shore Birth Center once again. That's made the top of the news on the front page.
Yeah, Rick, today as we speak, which is Thursday, December 1st, is actually the last day of the North Shore Birth Center. Been writing about this most of the year. Beverly Hospital announced earlier this year that they were going to close the birth center. This is a place on the campus at the hospital. It's been around since 1980. About 10,000 babies have been born there, staffed by midwives. And so this group formed and fought the closing for months and months. And, they forced the hospital to delay it. But the bottom line is it's closing today. So yesterday on Wednesday, that group held an event outside the birth center in the pouring rain. They said the hospital wouldn't let them inside the birth center for the event, so they were upset about that too. But just to honor the midwives who have worked there over the years, and to mark the fact that it's closing. And this group says it wants to continue on. They've started a GoFundMe campaign. They want to sort of incorporate as a group and continue to push for midwife services on the North Shore, hopefully to establish a new birth center. The hospital, which is run by Beth Israel Lahey Health, they committed a few weeks ago to giving out $1.5 million in grants toward organizations that want to maybe establish another birth center somewhere. They said they would lease out the birth center building to an independent midwifery practice for like 2.5 years, I believe it is. So they haven't made some commitments in that regard. But the bottom line is it's closing. It's been around for 40 plus years, and today's the final day.
What I find interesting, Paul, is as I've gotten older and older, I've gone through generations of students in my teaching career, from one level to the parent, to the son or daughter, and then to the next generation. And you mentioned that there were, among some of the people who were at the birth center demonstrating yesterday, there were people who, of course, had availed themselves of the birth center, but also who were born there. And I'm just wondering if any were born there have also used it. What was that like, talking to them and seeing them there?
Yeah, it's been pretty emotional over these last few months. There was a public hearing on this a few months ago. It went on for 5 hours, and a lot of it was women talking about the great experiences they've had at the birth center, and the care that they get. So it's meant a lot to a lot of people. Like I said, 10,000 babies. So it's had a big impact on families across the North Shore. And I mean, they're upset that it's closing. It's at a time where the state had a commission recently that looked into healthcare and women's healthcare, and they're recommending that more places like the birth center open up, where women can have a natural birth without drugs, in a different environment than a hospital setting, that they say the outcomes are better and it costs less. And in the meantime, this big hospital chain is closing. At the hospital, to give their side, said that they don't have enough midwives. There's a staffing shortage. There's been a dispute over that. So it's kind of sad in some ways that it's only one of a handful of birth centers in Massachusetts. So it's not like these are all over the place. So it's kind of sad.
Well, what's the education of a midwife? Is that being a nurse of a sort?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I mean, I know that they're certified nurse midwives. That's what the people who staff the birth center, that was their job description. So and so they do get quite a bit of training on that. And the thing about the North Shore Birth Center, it was on the hospital campus, run by a hospital. So if needed, you could go literally across the street, across the driveway, and get help at the hospital. And that's another point the supporters made. It was sort of the best of both worlds, you know, and now it's gone, I think, basically over money.
All right. Well, we'll see what the Salem News has to say about that in the upcoming weeks and months. I know you'll be on the case. So look forward to that. It's been quite a story. Now, I want to turn attention. Let's go over to Salem. Paul, as we know, covers primarily the Beverly area, and Dustin is over in Salem. And Dustin, I've known Kim Driscoll for a long time. When we first started MSO News Sports, she was the first mayor to grant us access to the mayor's office and give us credentials. It was awesome. And I've become, editorially speaking, I've become an admirer of the mayor. But now stepping into the lieutenant governor's role and still being mayor, it's given you a lot of material to pass on to the masses. So let's start there. I want to start first of all, Dustin, with the dual role that she has right now for the next few weeks. What have you found there?
Yeah, so this is really interesting because she's managing basically two transitions at the same time. And she's not just managing the transition where she herself is moving, and actually that's not even a transition I was really thinking of, the fact that she personally is going from one career basically to another, but then also Salem is going to be transitioning from one mayor to another, and then the state is going to be transitioning from one administration to another. So these are all very, very big transitions that are happening at exactly the same time, and it actually seems like they're going to continue happening at the same time. So the recent news on Kim is that I had an opportunity to sit down with her in her office and kind of talk about different timetables that exist and things like that. And, she's very humbled by the win and she appreciates the support and everything. But then she also says, she's not resigning in Salem anytime soon. She would not put the city into any kind of a situation that would actually hurt the city intentionally. So she's going to be working with the transition in Salem while also chairing and leading the transition for the Healy Driscoll administration. So it's kind of an interesting dual role on that regard. The city's basically kickoff of its new year, its inaugural ceremonies and things like that are actually the first Monday of the year. And I don't know exactly how the federal recognition of New Year's Day is going to play in, if that's going to be Monday, January 2nd or Monday, January 8th. And that actually matters because the state's inauguration is, I think, Thursday the 5th at noon. So basically, Kim has indicated that she will not be resigning the mayorship ahead of time. So for all intents and purposes, she's going to remain the mayor until at least the beginning of January, at which point the city council will appoint a president and then appoint an acting mayor to replace Kim, while they then kick off the process for the elections that are also going to overlap with the city's own elections for next fall.
Okay. Okay.
It's a lot.
Math is a lot easier. Teaching math is so much easier, Dustin.
And I hate math, but I'd much rather.
Okay. No, you're keeping it pretty clear for us. And, again, editorially speaking, I think if anybody can handle that, it's Kim Driscoll. Interesting note, I think, that former Mayor Harrington has thrown his hat into the ring as the town manager up in Salisbury. I find that pretty curious. And there are several other people interested in the job as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting that there's several people with names that you don't necessarily recognize, and then names that you very clearly do recognize. Dominic Pangallo, Steve Dibble has thrown his hat in to some extent. He hasn't actually pulled any kind of campaign paperwork or anything like that, but he's saying that he's talking to people about running, and he's the person who just most recently ran against Kim and lost. So Neil Harrington provides kind of an interesting kind of entry into the mix, because you could actually ask what he's running for, if he's actually running for to become the next leader of the city, or if he's running to actually transition the city from its least most recent leader to its next one. And the reason why I make that point is because this is only a 3-year term. It's not actually going to be the full 4 years. And we actually just saw exactly the same thing play out in Marblehead, where John McGinn came back. He's somebody who was the finance director and town administrator previously, and he came back basically to fill the role for like 6 months so the town could actually focus on who its next administrator becomes. So I haven't had an opportunity to talk to Neil. He did speak with one of our reporters in Newburyport, and had told me that he was going to hold off on talking to Salem News until we're getting close to the election. So I don't know. I haven't had a chance to talk to him about if he wants to just basically take this term and help Salem through this kind of very significant time where he has the past leadership, or if he's looking to make a full return and actually become the permanent mayor.
Yeah, that is interesting. I've seen in school administrations, particularly when a superintendent resigns, there are former superintendents who've come in and they become placekeepers for a while to kind of, keep the ship on an even keel. That is,
Principals do the same thing.
yeah. All right. Thank you for that. Paul, I want to save a personal interest story here for last with you, but the ongoing building and what's the word I'm looking for? Interest, I guess, in that property that used to be McDonald's by the Beverly Salem Bridge is taking shape now in new form.
Yes, so the new restaurant, it's going to be called Mission Boathouse, is, the building is built. Anybody who's driven, over the Beverly Salem Bridge has seen it. And it's, I got to look inside yesterday, and I'm writing the story today. We'll have a video and some pictures by Jamie Campos, but the furniture, the tables and chairs aren't up and so forth. There's still a lot of construction going on, but at least it got a chance to look inside. So this is the restaurant. As you said, it was the site of the former McDonald's, and you say, well, it's a new restaurant, that's good, but what's a big deal? But it's kind of been a big deal in Beverly because it's really been almost like a 30-year long story since that McDonald's closed back in the 90s, and been all these kinds of efforts to get, mostly to get a restaurant there. It's too long and not that exciting story to tell about why it took so long, unless you want to hear the ins and outs of zoning and zoning regulations, Rick. It's like no thanks, right? But anyway, the bottom line is it's ready to open. It's owned by Marty Bloom. He's a guy. He actually told me yesterday he grew up in Gloucester, which I didn't realize till about the 6th grade, and but he was the owner, the founder of the Vinny Tester restaurants, if you remember those. He sold them quite a few years ago, and this is his 37th restaurant.
Oh, wow.
That he's opened, and he said it's by far the biggest, and that's the one thing that struck me. I mean, you drive by, you see it's 3 stories, it's big, and you go inside and it's huge, and some people, I think, even when it was being proposed, didn't like the idea of a restaurant that big was going up there. I think most people want something there after basically being an abandoned city-owned site for years. So there's going to be something there. I think people are going to be excited about it. So Marty, he still doesn't know when they're going to open. He's waiting for like National Grid to hook things up. It could be a month or 2, but soon is all he would say. But I'll have a story tomorrow in a short video giving people an inside.
Excellent.
Look inside.
Is there adequate parking there?
Probably not. That's a good
Okay.
Because that was a big point of contention among the neighbors down there. There are something like 60 parking spots on the site, but some of those need to be reserved for public access. There's this whole thing about public access to the waterfront. It's still city-owned land. The restaurant is leasing the land, and the restaurant actually needs to provide some public access space in the first floor where anybody can just walk in there. So we'll see. I guess Marty Bloom says he owns other restaurants where there's not all people find a place to park, but this is a sort of a congested neighborhood, the Goat Hill neighborhood and Fish Lake Hill, they call it, down by the bridge, with a lot of narrow streets, and so that's going to be interesting. Is how
the traffic too, going and coming from
it's going to be tricky.
Well, Ethan Foreman, your colleague up in Gloucester, there's a waterfront property the city owns up there called I4C2. That it's a similar situation. It's been years and years and years. And they're using it as a parking lot right now. So maybe they could do a shuttle from Gloucester to Beverly. But it's the same situation. So it's weird. All right.
And not to jump in, there's also Salem had a similar story, was because we're talking about basically the remains of the old bridge that used to connect Salem and Beverly. Salem took about 20 years to get its waterfront park on the other side, which actually used the original kind of where the road used to be. It's the Redmond Park that's right next to Bill and Bob's there. And he finally opened it like 2017, even though the park was ready to open back in 97.
Yeah. Okay. City stuff. And Dustin, let me see here. You are exploring a story on something going on in North Street with respect to rezoning, lining the roads.
Yeah, so North Street's been kind of, it's been kind of building as an issue for the last several months, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to jump on it like I wanted to because of Halloween and the elections and things like that. But basically, North Street is one of the busiest streets in the city of Salem. It's the one that connects downtown with Peabody, basically. And when it comes to the tourism season and things like that, it's the best way to get into Salem. There's a story that I've been putting together, kind of trying to catch up to this issue, where they saw people. So it's a 25-mile-an-hour road. It's very densely settled, and people were basically treating it like a dragway, just kind of flying down the thing. It had a couple very high-profile accidents in the last couple of years involving bicyclists that were hit by cars, basically same intersection, 10 days apart. And that got the city to really start rethinking its design on this. So a new design emerged that kind of gives greater priority to parked vehicles, to bicycles and things like that. Like there's bike lanes that are now protected by parked vehicles, and they narrowed the lanes from 15 feet to 11 feet, and they kind of shift them around these things, which gets the cars to slow down. Except one of the things that's making it a little difficult is that there's kind of growing pains being associated with this. And what people saw wasn't so much the conversations that went into and the planning that went into these things. They just basically saw the street get repainted with these lines that kind of go like this. And then they go, what the heck? We can't drive down like we normally used to. And now you actually have to pay attention to where you're driving. And of course, the city says, well, this is actually the intention. We want you to slow down. And so I've got a story that I'm working on where you basically have some residents that are saying that they don't like the project because it has taken the power away from the vehicle. And then more recently, there was also a 4-car crash that everybody then automatically said, well, this is because of the repainting. And there's been all kinds of misinformation flying around about that. So ultimately, police were able to determine that that recent accident did not have to do with the road. And what the story that I'm kind of going into shows is that the city is actually, even though the lines have been permanently painted at this point, the city is still keeping track of what's going on. They're watching for accidents. They're looking to see how vehicles slow down. If they don't slow down, if they start taking out the little flexible posts on the sides, and to kind of expecting to return back to the city at some point and saying, okay, here's what the actual outcome of this project was. Did it actually help the city? Did it not help the city? Right now, Northfields is basically split in half on whether that's actually the case or not.
Well, it sounds to me a lot like if you're familiar with Sawyer Road in Beverly, going out to 128 or coming in the other direction on the parallel road. At night, the reflection, the lines, the signs, the dotted stuff, if you don't know where you're going, God bless you. I mean, it's once again, they fixed something wasn't broke, but it sounds like that this is a safety issue ongoing in Salem. Look forward to seeing that reporting.
Thank you.
All righty. Paul, I guess we'll kind of wrap it up. I want to talk a little bit about Santa Claus maybe in both cities, but you did a really powerful story on a World War II veteran.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. I'm really glad I got a chance to do this story. As we know, there aren't a lot of World War II veterans left, and so to get a chance to speak to somebody was really great. So this is a story about Saul Gurman, Beverly resident, 99 years old. He's in great health, really sharp. But November 26th was the anniversary of the day that he was a U.S. soldier in World War II. He was 20 years old. He was aboard this British transport ship called the Rona, and it was hit by German bombs from a German plane, sunk. More than 1,000 men died in that attack, and he was one of the survivors. And so he told me the whole story of how he survived and so forth. But what's really interesting about this is the survivors and everybody else associated this when it happened were sworn to secrecy. This whole thing was classified by the military because, from what I understand, the German missiles, the Germans were using this new technology at the time. They were, radio controlled missiles, which was fairly new, and it was very effective. And the United States government military didn't want the Germans to know how effective, those missiles had been, or to let the public know. So everybody involved was sworn to secrecy for like 60 years after this happened. And Mr. Gurman said he didn't even tell his wife. He just told her that he had been involved in this, terrible thing in World War II, but never talked about the specifics. And he said he and his wife were watching TV or were in the other room one day when Tom Brokaw, if you remember him, came on. And what year was it? I'm looking at my story. It was like 22 years ago. And Tom Brokaw broke the story of the sinking of the Rona. We call it the best kept secret in World War II. By that time, I guess that he had made public records requests and basically got it declassified. And so then people can talk about it. Now there have been reunions of the survivors. There's a documentary in the works, but it was just great to get the chance to talk to Mr. Gurman and to tell his story of survival.
That brings up something I saw recently. There's a movie called The Right Stuff about Chuck Yeager and breaking the sound barrier back in '48, I guess it was, or '47, whatever it was. And the news reporters there were invited to see it, to watch it, and then they were told they couldn't report on it. And
wow,
it just gets me to thinking about, and we'll save it for another day, I guess. But what you gentlemen go through sometimes in getting a story, I'm sure you face some ethical issues on what you say, how you say it, and whether or not you publish. And I think that's something that that readers don't quite understand. It's really easy for readers to criticize when you get a quote wrong inadvertently, but I don't think they understand that. And I think I'd like to ask you guys, if you keep that in mind, I'd like to discuss that at some point.
yeah, that'd be great, Rick. It's a great topic. It's sort of behind the scenes, but I think sometimes in newspapers and media, like, we don't talk enough about how things work, how the sausage is made, that type of thing.
Right.
And maybe we take for granted and say, why don't people understand this? So yeah, any chance to talk about it would be great.
Yeah, and Dustin, I'd like you to participate too, because you deal with people, and even sometimes just the questions you ask even before you start writing, it must cause some consternation at times.
Yeah, and also there are times when we'll work on stories that are really, really hard, and there are things that we know that we don't report. Like, I could think back to like the incident that happened with the gym teacher at Saltonstall School recently, which is now all kinds of criminal court proceedings and things like that. There were a lot of details. I was hearing about specific victims, and I actually was able to, through one way or another, hear about where, this victim was this old, this victim dealt with this incident. And, these are all issues that never actually make it to the story. And those are all decisions that we make to basically serve as a filter and decide how much of the ugliness of some of these things does the public actually have to see.
I think that's a great discussion and a great point to be made, because again, as a reader, just thumbing through the paper or online or whatever, we say, why didn't they say this, or what is that? And I think it'd be important for me anyway to listen to what you have to go through sometimes in the decision. That's not the decisions necessarily you have to make, but how you make those decisions. I think that's critical. And I'm sure that's
also when to push, when not to push. Paul's an expert at this with the variant story in terms of which angles to press on which ones not to.
Well, I cringe sometimes when I'm watching the national news and they're asking a person who was the victim or had someone who was a victim of a tragedy, and they start with, "Well, how do you feel?" And it's like these are big time people. So I mean, I look forward to that. I respect what you guys do, obviously, and you do a great job. But I think, given this vehicle that we have, we'd be able to talk a little bit about that. Maybe educate somebody about it at some point.
Yeah. Great.
All right. Final comment, gentlemen. Want to go to each city. Paul, back to you. Do you generally cover this time of year festive stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, to be honest, probably not as much as we used to. We sort of pick and choose, with our staff. We do a lot of it with photos. For instance, the holiday parade in Beverly was this weekend. I mean, we had some nice photos of that. But yeah, I mean, the local newspaper is always a good place to let people know what's coming up, and to take photos. And but otherwise, yeah, that sort of goes along in the background while we work on our other stuff. It's kind of how I look at it,
Yeah, I know you have so much staff, so Dustin, I'm sure that's a priority, right? Is to get out and cover Santa Claus.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because last week, so, it's sometimes when you work journalism, you also work other jobs to afford the journalism habit. I remember that was something that, one of our past photo directors was like, "Oh yeah, I shoot weddings on the weekend so that I could support the day job." And every once in a while, so one of the things that I've always kind of griped about is the fact that every single year when Santa arrives and comes off the roof of the Hawthorne Hotel, I'm at my weekend job. I can never catch it. So this year I was actually interviewing a bunch of people hours ahead of time as if Santa had already arrived. Like, "Oh, so, what was the tree like?" and things like that. And, because the story didn't run until after, but it was written beforehand because I couldn't be there. So,
right.
So there's certain ways that we try to get the holiday cheer into the paper.
Another little insight from the reporters that I love.